School of Government. It's my pleasure to welcome you this evening to the annual presentation of the Goldsmith Awards. These awards are named for Berta Goldsmith, who lived her entire life in Philadelphia until she died there 10 years ago at the age of 97. A former concert pianist and medical technician, she left most of her fortune to charities in those fields. But journalism was another special interest that she had. Mrs. Goldsmith believed strongly in the critical role the press plays in a democratic society. She was a faithful follower of Washington Week in Review, Wall Street Week, and of course, 60 Minutes. And visitors to her home were expected to be fully informed about those programs and the topics they had recently examined. Like other awards and endowed lectures here at the Kennedy School, the Goldsmith Awards acknowledge excellence, in this case, excellence in investigative reporting and in research about government, politics, and the press. They also reflect the Kennedy School's tradition of bringing together practitioners and scholars. The Goldsmith Awards are administered through the Kennedy School's Joan Shorenstein Center on Press, Politics, and Public Policy, which is dedicated to examining the intersection of theory and practice in those fields. And we're honored to have with us this evening Walter Shorenstein, and it was for his daughter Joan, who worked as a producer at CBS, that the center is named. Walter, thank you for your foresight in creating this institution. Now I'd like to introduce to you the distinguished professor and journalist who will in turn introduce our program and tonight's speaker. After a 30-year career as a chief diplomatic correspondent for CBS and NBC, and as moderator of NBC's Meet the Press, Marvin Calp came to the Kennedy School and built the Shorenstein Center into the preeminent institution on the press and politics. As many of you know, Marvin is leaving Cambridge at the end of this term. He is going to become emeritus, but I promise you he will not be lost to the Kennedy School. We refuse to allow that. Marvin is going to take up a new position as executive director of the Shorenstein Center's Washington office. But I'd like to take a moment just to reflect on Marvin's remarkable tenure here at the Kennedy School. I think it's fair to say that the Shorenstein Center represents excellence in understanding an area which is essential to our democracy. And I think it's also fair to say that the Shorenstein Center is in effect the house that Marvin built. If you look at the excellent institution, I think it is a tribute to what Marvin has done over the past decade. Marvin is a well-known author, a famous reporter, a great professor, a firm friend, but I think best of all, Marvin is the creator of an institution. And to be able to say that you've left behind you something that would not otherwise have existed, and left something which is a real tribute to making the world a better place, that's a tribute to an individual. And that individual is our introducer tonight, Marvin Calp. So please, without further ado, join me in both thanking and welcoming Marvin Calp.
Thank you very much, Dean. That's very kind, and I appreciate it. This is the 8th time that the Goldsmith Awards have been given to young scholars, writers, and journalists, those people who have been exploring the crucially important intersection of press, politics, and public policy, exploring the real world, as it's often said here at the Kennedy School, where theory is put into practice. None of these awards would have been possible without the exceptional, imaginative contributions of two people, Berta Goldsmith and Robert Greenfield. The late and generous Miss Goldsmith, as you've already heard, was a woman from Philadelphia who loved, among many other things, the news. What happened today? What does it mean? Who's telling the truth? Who's lying? She admired journalism that dug behind the headlines, that explained things. Robert Greenfield, now retired and is here tonight. Bob, where are you? Stand up. I want to thank you very much in front of everyone. Bob Greenfield was a Philadelphia lawyer, now retired, a graduate of the Harvard Law School. He looked after Miss Goldsmith's legal and financial affairs, and shortly after she died in 1989, Mr. Greenfield met Professor Gary Oren of our faculty, and a wonderful idea was hatched, that in Miss Goldsmith's name, awards be given on an annual basis to scholars and journalists aimed at the rather simple proposition that while power can corrupt public officials, it can also provide the means by which public officials, kept to a very high ethical standard, can help people thrive in a democracy. The key has always been the same: to cast the spotlight of inquiry into the dark, complex corners of governance, a job for journalists and a job for scholars. As director of this center, I have had the honor to run this unique program from its inception. The Goldsmith Awards come in 4 parts. First, research awards generally given to young scholars embarking on their careers. Second, the $5,000 Goldsmith Book Prize, which our committee selects for that book, which best, in our view, explores the intersection of press politics and public policy. Third, the Goldsmith Prize for Investigative Reporting, a $25,000 prize to the article or series of articles that, in the committee's judgment, represents the best example of investigative reporting into matters of public policy. And finally, the Goldsmith Career Award for Excellence in Journalism, given each year to the reporter who throughout his or her career has personified a strong commitment to the craft of journalism. Let us start with the Goldsmith Research Awards. I've asked Pippa Norris, Executive Director for Research at the Shorenstein Center, a scholar and lecturer here, to present these awards. Pippa.
Thank you very much, Marvin. This is always such a pleasant occasion to be able to honor those who are doing some very important research in the area. And research is very much at the heart of the Kennedy School and the Shorenstein Center. And the work which we're going to honor today, people are doing a wide range of different topics, but very much in applied policy areas, important policy problems which are facing either the United States or the world. So, for example, some of the research focuses on issues like gun control, or civil rights, or diversity in Congress and how the press covers that. Others looks at issues like, for example, the role of the Fourth Estate in Mexico, or how the European Union can develop communication policy. So what I'd like to do is just briefly say a word or two about each of our 14 nominees, and then at the end I'd like to ask them to rise, those who are attending, and we can applaud them then. The first, Karen Kelleher, University of Massachusetts, Boston, who's working on media frames, pressure groups, and politicians. And again, this issue of gun control, such a vital issue, and how the media covers that when it's being debated. Rosalie Clausen, Purdue University, media coverage of state legislatures, and in particular how far women are able to run and whether or not the media gives them an opportunity or acts as a barrier to their representation in the body politic. Anne Gordon, a doctoral candidate at the University of Southern California, who's been working on values in campaign communication, and how some of the basic American values, ideas of things like liberty and equality, are actually covered in the media, and what are the consequences for election campaigns. Sally Hughes, another PhD candidate, who is from the Center for Latin American Studies, Tulane. And she's been looking at the role of the Fourth Estate in Mexico, how you can develop a free press in periods of democratization, something which is really vital for the next presidential election coming along fairly soon. A critical press is really the basis for a free election. Eric Jackson from the Kennedy School, who is a PhD student, looking at how news framing affects interest group conflicts at community level in Louisiana. Kim Friedkin Khan, who's worked for many years on the area of state and Senate races, and again, how women can run and break through. And once they do break through into power, what does that mean for how the press covers them? Taeku Lee, one of the faculty at the Kennedy School, who's working on black insurgency, media coverage, and racial attitudes during the civil rights movement, an important area which I think will produce a very important book in due course. P.H. Longstaff, Syracuse, looking at campaign communication regulation in the European Union. The European Union has always been struggling to move across frontiers in the new global world. And this is really looking at what are the dynamics of that process. Michael Mccauley, who works at the University of Maine on public radio and the public interest. Increasingly, public service television and radio are under threat, and people are asking, what is their role? And Michael is looking at this, looking at it from the founding of NPR in the 1970s to date. Felicia Mobain, also at Harvard University, looking at how the media covers Medicare and the important issues of health. Jonathan Morris, a doctoral candidate at Purdue, who's looking at the press and the US Congress. We know that many institutions have really been treated very critically, very negatively in the press. How far does that contribute to public cynicism? What's going on? Richard Schultz at Tufts University, at the Fletcher School, on the case of the CNN nerve gas controversy, and what were the standards being used, and whether or not there was journalistic dereliction of duty in that story. Sonia Silla, Temple University, public deliberation, an important issue in terms of new ways in which the public can discuss issues, and in particular, using the Supreme Court case of Paula Jones versus William Clinton as its focus. And last, Adam Simon, University of Washington, looking again at campaigns and the winning message, candidate behavior, campaign discourse, and democracy in the US Senate. So a wide range of research, and I think it's so important that the Goldsmith Awards can help at an early stage. And this is going to produce articles, papers, and books, which I hope will be able to come back to us for candidates for our next set of awards as well. So let me just ask those who are here to rise, if we can applaud them to honor their work. Thank you all very much. And now I'd like to turn to the next set of awards, which is the Goldsmith Book Awards. And to introduce those, Tom Patterson, the Bradley Professor of Government and the Press, very well known to all of us for classics on the mass media and mass media elections. Tom.
Pippa, thank you. It's my pleasure to present the Goldsmith Book Prize, awarded each year to what we believe is the top book in the press politics field. As Marvin indicated, the prize carries a $5,000 cash award. This year's recipient is James Hamilton, Assistant Professor of Public Policy and Economics at Duke University. His book, Channeling Violence, is a pioneering study. Earlier research demonstrated that violent acts on television contribute to heightened aggression and fear. Professor Hamilton goes beyond that to demonstrate just how thoroughly some broadcasters exploit violent programming to build audience and increase their advertising revenue. Broadcasters who load their primetime hours with violent movies and programs, for example, also pack their newscasts with violent crime. Professor Hamilton argues that we ought to view such broadcasters through the same lens that we view environmental polluters. They are not paying for the cost they impose on society, and we ought to find ways to make them pay. But Professor Hamilton can make his argument better than I can, so let me introduce you to this year's Goldsmith Book Prize recipient, James Hamilton. Congratulations.
People in the industry that I study often thank their agent and the Academy for their awards. And tonight I'd like to thank two members of the Academy who've had a big influence on me. Professor Joe Kalt at the Kennedy School, who was my undergraduate advisor and my thesis advisor, encouraged me to use economics to look at offbeat topics, which is how I ended up writing about TV violence. And the other person who inspired me when I was here as an undergraduate was Robert Coles, who introduced me to books that I read instead of watching television. And the other people I'd like to thank are my parents, who paid all my tuition bills when I was an undergraduate, and that allowed me to do things like usher at events like this. So thank you very much for this award.
Thank you very much. We now go to the Goldsmith Prize for Investigative Reporting. The decision each year is made by a committee that reads and reviews and discusses all of the submissions, of which we received this year about 75. There is a widespread view that investigative journalism as a profession is in sharp decline, the victim of tightening budgets and dwindling interest. But after reading all of the submissions this year, I must respectfully reject that view. Investigative reporting is alive and well. Budgets may indeed be tighter, but obviously there are still many journalists and many news organizations determined to engage in tough but fair investigative reporting. Most of the submissions were excellent. It was extremely difficult to select the winner of this $25,000 prize. The truth is, when you've read all of these submissions, you can narrow the field to, say, 30 without too much pain. But to then narrow the field to 20 and then on to 10, the process of selection becomes extraordinarily difficult. And then when the goal is lowered still further to the finalists, the process becomes nearly impossible. One submission seems as good as another. This year we got down to the final 6, and then we prayed. The 6 finalists for this year's Goldsmith Prize for Investigative Reporting are in alphabetical order, and when I call your news organization and then your name, please stand in place. The Baltimore Sun, reporters Will England and Gary Cohn. Their report, The Shipbreakers. The Miami Herald, reporters Manny Garcia, Dan Keating, Joseph Tanfani, and Andres Figlucci. Their reports, Dirty Votes, The Race for Miami Mayor. Newsweek magazine, reporter Michael Isikoff, his reports, President Clinton and the Monica Lewinsky scandal. The St. Louis Post-Dispatch, reporters William Allen, Kim Bell, and Andrew Skolnick. Their report, Healthcare Behind Bars. The Wall Street Journal, reporter Alex Friedman. Her report, Population Bomb. And finally, the Washington Post, reporter Bart Gellman. His report, Shell Games, the search for Iraq's hidden weapons. All 6 finalists, excellent reporters and news organizations, deserve this prize. They all wrote important and powerful pieces. The committee agonized and finally selected the Miami Herald for its reporting on Dirty Votes, the race for Miami Mayor. Will the 4 reporters please come forward at this time and accept your prize?
Boy, thank you very, very, very much. I have to say that when we found out that we were finalists for this, we were so thrilled and so honored. And we found out who the other finalists were, and of course, I think as is human nature, we of course had to look at their work. And to say that our work would even stand up next to that kind of work was just such an honor that we were amazed just to be here as finalists. And I, quite frankly, you know, everyone I've told that we were coming up here, I said, don't worry, I can guarantee you we're not going to win this, because I've seen the other stuff and we don't stand up next to it. So I really have to say that we're really honored and we really appreciate this. We would like to say that we have completely cleaned up Miami, but maybe that'll have to be another year. So thank you very, very, very much.
I would now like to invite the other finalists to come up and receive another token of our esteem for them and for their work. William Allen, Kim Bell, and Andrew Skolnick of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, William England and Gary Cohn of the Baltimore Sun, Alex Friedman of the Wall Street Journal, and Bart Gellman of the Washington Post. Please come on up. Well, thank you all very much, and congratulations to all of the finalists. And now, with a great deal of personal pleasure, it's time for me to introduce the recipient of the 1999 Goldsmith Career Award for Excellence in Journalism. In 1972, just as the Watergate scandal was beginning to sweep through the nation's capital, I met the newest member of the Washington Bureau of CBS News, a rather bemused, bespectacled, beautiful blonde from Swampscott, Massachusetts, named Leslie Stahl. CBS had just recognized that women, too, could be reporters. We happy few, we band of brothers, as Henry V might have put it, Cronkite, Severide, Rather, Mudd, Calp, all of us, we were suddenly welcoming women into CBS News with uneven degrees of enthusiasm. I remember thinking, it's about time. In the early 1970s, there were only 3 evening newscasts. CBS, we thought we were the best, and I think we were. NBC, which was next, and then ABC, languishing at that time far, far behind. Every evening, shortly before 6:30 p.m., when the Cronkite News aired, we correspondents and producers would all gather around the 3 monitors in the newsroom and kibitz. God, Walter's getting gray, one of us would say. Or perhaps something really profound, such as, Nixon's such a jerk. One evening, amidst such solemnity, Leslie Stahl made her first appearance on the CBS Evening News. Voiceover, meaning we couldn't see her, we just heard her. Roger Mudd and I stood up and gave her a standing ovation anyway. Later on another evening, she was not only heard, she was also seen for the first time on CBS. Again, a standing ovation, but Leslie seemed, to me anyway, somewhat preoccupied. She was expecting a phone call from her mother, her cheerleader critic, as Leslie described her. And her cheerleader critic wasn't calling. So Leslie called her and got not praise, but an earful. 40 million Americans saw you tonight, her mother bellowed. One of them is my future son-in-law. But he's never going to call you for a date now because you're wearing your glasses. Later on, Leslie's mother would resume this line of attack. Don't you think there's a reason why Walter Cronkite doesn't wear his glasses? Or Barbara Walters doesn't wear her glasses? Well, with them or without them, Leslie Stahl's career began to zoom upward to the stars. She quickly became one of them, covering political campaigns and conventions. And then in 1978, the plum of plums, she was named White House correspondent for CBS News, a job she held with only a few interruptions, as I recall, until 1991, meaning she reported on the Carter, Reagan, and Bush administrations. During this remarkable stretch of time, she was also moderator of CBS's Sunday morning interview program, Face the Nation, which, by the way, Joan Shorenstein was the executive producer of. Joan Shorenstein, whose name is right up there. And Leslie interviewed in this responsibility, among many, many other people, Margaret Thatcher, Boris Yeltsin, and Yasser Arafat. In 1991, upon finishing her White House assignment, Leslie got still another plum. She became one of the co-anchors of 60 Minutes, a job she says she still enjoys enormously. One Leslie Stahl story says so much about the business she has graced for the past 27 years. President Reagan knew exactly how to use television to advance his political agenda. The actor in him understood instinctively the power of the TV image, the importance of the American flag behind him, the angle of the sun, the friendly wave of the hand even when there was nobody there to wave to. The CBS Evening News asked Stahl to do a piece on how Reagan used television. The pictures of the president were, as always, flattering. Those were the only kinds of pictures that the White House allowed. But Stahl's voiceover copy exploded with stinging criticism. It was excellent television. And CBS gave it 5 minutes and 40 seconds, which in television land is an eternity. But Stahl and CBS expected the White House to blow its stack, to cut her off, to freeze her out, to exile her. When the piece ran, Stahl waited in her office for the phone to ring, for the Reagan people to counterattack. The phone rang, and it was, of all people, Richard Darman, now a professor here at the Kennedy School. "Way to go, kiddo," Darman exclaimed. "What a great story. We loved it. 5 minutes of free media. We owe you big time." Stahl was astonished by his cheerful response. "Why are you so happy?" she asked. "Didn't you hear what I said?" "Nobody heard what you said," Darman replied. "You guys in television land haven't figured it out yet, have you? When the pictures are powerful, they override, if not completely drown out the sound. I mean it, Leslie. Nobody heard you." I've just finished researching another book on this very subject. Now, I haven't actually started to write it, but I know exactly what I want the jacket to look like. I want it to look just like this. I mean, how can you miss? Leslie's book is called Reporting Live, something that she has done so well for so long. Leslie Stahl, you're the winner of the 1999 Goldsmith Career Award for Excellence in Journalism. Please.
Thank you, Marvin. My prize. Thank you, thank you. Can I put it right here? I'm going to show it off. Wow, well, thank you. What an honor. Of course, I think I'm too young to have a career award, but I am so thrilled. First, to be here at the Joan Shorenstein Center. As Marvin said, Joan was the producer of Face the Nation when I was the moderator, but Joan was my best friend. And so it is a special treat and a special honor. And also because Marvin's here. And when Marvin told the story about applauding me and giving me a standing ovation when my first 2 pieces ran, it meant so much to me. You can imagine being the new kid at the CBS Bureau in 1972 when affirmative action passed and they hired me, along with Bernie Shaw and Connie Chung, and gave us children's desks in the corridor outside of Bernie Calp's office in the 2nd row. And we couldn't obviously sit at these desks because our knees would hit our chin, so that was out. But Marvin and Roger Mudd and George Herman and a couple of others, by tradition, would give a standing ovation to a reporter when she, in this case, had her first story on the air. And it exploded in my chest that these people were so good to us. If the other reporters weren't welcoming, I never knew it. I always felt that at least the correspondents wanted us to succeed, and they certainly made me feel that way. Can't say the same for the crews, but that's, of course, what my book's all about, so you have to read it. So I live in New York now. I'm from here, started here, Channel 5, and then went to Washington, 20 years. And they said, if you want to work at 60 Minutes, which I really wanted to do, they said you had to move to New York. And of course, we moved there at the height of the crime wave in New York and discovered very quickly that it was foolish to have a car there because you would never leave it on the street, ever, ever, ever. You would immediately put it in a garage, and I couldn't tell a Bostonian how much you pay to keep a car in a garage in New York. So needless to say, within about 3 weeks, we got rid of the car. My husband got a bicycle. And we went out to dinner at the safest address in New York City, the Regency Hotel, 61st and Park Avenue. It doesn't get any safer, even at the height of the crime wave. He rode his bike. He had this chain lock that weighed 4 times what the bike weighed, and he chained it to the tree next to the doorman. We had dinner, came out. I jumped in a cab, and he said, "I'll be home in a half hour." 3 hours later, I'm, of course, frantic. He limps into the apartment. He looks terrible. He is pale. He looks sick. I said, "Oh, my God, you got mugged." He said, "No." I said, "They took the bike." He said, "No." I said, "What?" "They took the seat." Think about it. You have to know that if I really didn't love 60 Minutes, it would have been awfully tough staying in that city. But I love 60 Minutes. Of course, we're still doing the hard-edged journalism that we've always done at 60 Minutes. That hasn't changed. And I'm working with my second extraordinary team of reporters after the Washington Bureau in the early 70s. As you know, all of the people at 60 Minutes are of the most experienced, most serious reporters on television. And I'll tell you all a secret, now that I've been there 8.5 years, I've gotten younger. But then again, you'd get younger too if you work with guys that old. Mike Wallace is 80, Andy is 80, and our boss, Don Hewitt, is 76. Morley Safer says that it's gotten to the point where it's a conflict of interest for us to do a story on Medicare. That's out of the question. So how many of you, I expect you're all going to raise your hands, were totally plugged into the Monica scandal? I mean, not you, okay, but everybody else, right? Morning, noon, and night, got home at night, turned on the tube. Hockenberry, am I the only one in the room? Come on. Come on, tell me. Come on, you're news junkies. Do you know what to watch when you get home? Are you feeling really bad? Really? No? Am I by myself up here? I'm not by myself. Okay, help me, help me. My point is that if you ever wondered whether television news, forget television, news, television news and print have turned almost completely into entertainment, I think we've just gotten the evidence of it, because this was entertaining, and that's where the whole profession is heading. What disturbs me in all of what we've just gone through is that the public today now thinks of the media as one big salad bowl. And in the bowl, we have Hockenberry, we have Rush Limbaugh, we have Robert Novak, we have Patrick Buchanan. He's a politician. He's running for president. He's the media. And then you have the mainstream press. And the public now sees us all as one thing. And they don't trust us. They think we're all opinionated. They think every time we go on television, we're out there pushing a point of view. And it's because the reporters are going on the same shows with the politicians and the opinionators. There's such a word. I mean, what did you think about what happened with Washington Week in Review? You know, Ken Bodie's gone. They want more of an edge. And this is just where we're headed. And that the public doesn't differentiate is a problem today, and it's only going to get worse. And I don't know how we unwind this. I just don't know how we get back to the idea that there is a mainstream press, there are beat reporters, and they don't give their opinions every time they go out in public. Okay, I asked you about the scandal. How many of you think Hillary's going to run for Senate in New York? Less than half. It certainly would obviously be the ultimate statement of independence from her husband. She would have to move to New York while he's still president. And she would have to make comments on policy while he's still president. One thing that has intrigued me over the course of the scandal, partly because of the story Marvin just told you about the power of pictures on television, has been Hillary Clinton's game face that she has worn throughout the scandal. And in fact, let's include the president's game face. in this discussion. I'm talking about how they have both smiled their way through everything that's been thrown at them. And I say smiled, and I call it a game face or a mask because Dale Bumpers, former senator from Arkansas, went on the Senate floor and said that the scandal has decimated the Clinton family, and that the president was distressed at the effect it was having on Hillary, and yet they still smile. Now, of course, I'm telling you this on a day when the New York Post, and I just brought it just in case you didn't see today's New York Post, has a story called Chillery. Have you seen this? Chillery. The New York Post said that the reason that Hillary Clinton didn't go to Latin America with the president was because she refused to stay in the same room with him. And if she got her own room, it would come out in the press, and she just didn't want to have the controversy. But really the reason I'm showing it to you is because I have thought that Hillary never let the game face, never got it off. And here the New York Post has found, I think the one time that the game face wasn't there. She's so furious at him, she's going to hit him. You could see it. And he's going to hit her back. But forget that for a minute, because mainly we saw the smiles. Now, I have a theory about what those faces that the Clintons wore throughout the past 2 years, what these faces said to us, what the subliminal message was as they went across the tube. They said, hey, we're not distressed, we're not guilt-ridden, we're not agonized, so why should you be? And it had the effect, I think, or at least contributed to a minimizing, a diminishing of the scandal in our eyes. Because I do think when we see pictures on television that we get a reaction, a gut reaction to them. We don't always think up here what they mean, but we get a sense of them in our stomachs. Now go back to February 14th, 1974. It was 6 months before Richard Nixon was forced to resign. And this was a time of the Watergate scandal where the pressure on the White House was so enormous that Nixon hadn't been seen for weeks. No press cover, no news conferences. He was basically hiding inside the White House. CBS News gets a tip from the maitre d' of Trader Vic's in Washington, about 2 blocks from the White House, that the president would be taking his wife to dinner for her birthday to his favorite restaurant. That's Richard Nixon. So, of course, they send the new kid to do the stakeout of the Nixons going to dinner. And we hadn't seen him in weeks, so it was going to be a big story. We're going to get a picture of him. It's going to be great. So I show up, and the only other reporter to be there is Helen Thomas. So the 2 women are there, and the maitre d' gives us a great table. We have a clear view of the president's table. And, of course, the president's taking his wife out for her birthday, and he brings along Bibi Rebozo, his best friend. And Helen and I have got this huge scoop going. We've got our notebooks. We write down spare ribs. We write down everything they order, right? This is our big scoop. Fried rice. And we write down, he smiled, she didn't, whatever we were writing down. The maitre d' said, well, you can't ask them any questions in the restaurant. So they paid the bill. We ran outside, hoping to get off a question or two for our great scoop. I was going to get it on, I was going to have an 11:01. Remember the 11:01s? We could get big news stories in the local news shows at 11:01. The local anchorman would say, and in Washington, a great news story, and at 60 seconds after the hour, bing, I'd pop up everywhere all over the country saying Richard Nixon had Chinese food tonight. So I opened the door of the restaurant, and there are 100 cameras, 300 reporters, and of course they're all men, and this huge sigh of disappointment comes emanating out because it's Helen and me and not the Nixons. And so Helen and I are now jostled to the back of this pack. We can't see anything, and we can't hear anything, and we're furious. We're standing there just furious because we've lost our scoop. And the press surrounds the president. Secret Service did not keep the press away in those days, and they're shouting questions at him, and he's stuck in the middle of the circle, and Helen and I can't hear anything. And we turn around, and guess who's standing right beside us but Pat Nixon? She, too, had been jostled to the back of the pack. Her eyes fill up with tears. The point of this is no game face, by the way. Her eyes fill up with tears. And she says, can you believe that with all his troubles, with what he's been through, that he would take me out to dinner on my birthday? She's going on, and the tears spill out, and I'm thinking to myself, after what he's put you through for the past 2 years, you're talking like that? But she is, and she's tearing up, and she said, my poor husband, what he's been through, and so forth and so on. And I think of that story today, and I wonder if I ever got Mrs. Clinton alone like that, you know I'd get the game face. I know she'd smile and give me the sense that everything was okay and that no problem. And I'm wondering if the Clintons have been habituated by the fact that we live in this incredibly intrusive television era where they are seen so much on the public airwaves, or whether it's actually the Clintons themselves and that they would have been this way back in the early 70s. I don't know. But what I do know is that I've been fascinated by the effect of television on people's decisions about our leaders and about our government. The enormous impact of pictures. The story that Marvin told led me to run it all over town, tell everybody I knew what Richard Darman had told me about the power of picture and how the pictures were drowning out what we were saying, particularly if they conflicted with what we were saying. And of course, I was being tough, and there was President Reagan smiling all over these pictures, and it was so, the contrast was so great, I really was drowned out. Martin Schramm of the Washington Post took my story to a focus group, and I was in the room, and he showed it without my track. And everybody said, oh, that's an ad for the Reagan re-election campaign. And then he ran it with my track. And more than half the people still thought it was an ad. In other words, they didn't hear me at all, at all. More than half of the rest thought it was a positive news story. So less than 25% really heard what the point of the story was. So ever since then, of course, I have been fascinated by the power of pictures. I can remember every Friday when President Reagan was in the White House, practically every Friday, he would go up to Camp David with Nancy Reagan. And of course, the helicopter would be on the lawn. The reporters would be brought out to get this picture of the President and First Lady walking to the helicopter. And Reagan, being one of the most gracious men who ever lived, it was not in him to be rude. He couldn't do it. So if a question was shouted, he'd answer it. And his staff would say, don't answer their questions. Of course, every time he answered a question, there was a factual error and 3 days of stories correcting the factual error. Please don't talk to them, please. And of course, he just couldn't. So Michael Deaver thought up the brilliant idea of turning the helicopter engines on. So every Friday, what went out over the airwaves, and you would see it every Friday on the evening news, and everybody watched the evening news in those days, you'd see, the first thing you'd see was, that's the first thing. Then you'd see Nancy, and she'd always have the dog. So she'd be dragged along by the dog. She'd have the little makeup kit. Then the president would give her the look, you know. And every woman in America was saying, if my husband gave me that look just once in my whole marriage. And of course, Nancy's getting it every Friday. And she's giving him the gaze, the Nancy gaze. And what does the picture say? And you saw it all the time. The picture said, oh, God, what a great family they are. Family values, family people, oh my. Well, we knew up here that they rarely spoke to their children and that they barely knew their grandchildren. But here was this powerful picture. And it basically erased what we knew. And the picture was getting us here. Now, I've had this theory about pictures getting us in our gut for a long time, and I come prepared with clips, by the way, if you haven't noticed. This was in the Washington Post, the New York Times book review a couple of weeks ago. I love the title that the New York Times gave this book. They called it The Second Brain, the gut. Here's the real title of the book. You're going to love it. The Scientific Basis of Gut Instinct and a Groundbreaking New Understanding of Nervous Disorders of the Stomach and Intestine. But the point is that the gut is a brain, that it has the same chemistry, a lot of the same chemicals, a lot of the same kind of neurons and connections that the brain has, and that the only thing that's really missing is conscious thought. But it has serotonin, It has all the kind of neurotransmitters that the brain has, and it thinks. So when you churn, you're thinking. And I believe when you see these things on television, that's where the impact comes. I'll tell you another story. This is not exactly about this. This story is really about, while we have our gut reactions to what we see on television, the camera itself has gut reactions to the people it's shooting. The camera has its own emotions. It loves and hates. It loved John Kennedy. The camera loves Bill Clinton. Camera did not like Bob Dole. And the camera absolutely loathed Dan Quayle. And I will tell you a story about Dan Quayle. You remember that when he was running for vice president, every time that poor man opened his mouth, he seemed to make a mistake. And it got to the point where he almost didn't have to open his mouth. People began to laugh. Now, I know this for a fact, that by the end of the campaign, the Bush people told Dan Quayle, you can campaign in towns with two names as long as the second name is Forks. So you can campaign in Lower Forks, in Minor Forks, and in Lesser Forks, as long as the towns have populations of 300 people or less. And there is no media market within 1,000 miles. And then go and campaign. So this is how bad it was for Dan Quayle. So now he's elected vice president, and his staff decides that he has to face the press, but maybe we should do it in a one-on-one interview. And he had been on Face the Nation a couple of times. He was fine. He didn't make mistakes. He didn't look like a deer caught in the headlights, and he was fine. So they chose me for his first big television interview. And I went to his transition office, and I sat knee to knee, and I stared into his eyes real hard. He was not staring like a caught in the headlights. Absolutely not. In fact, I had two producers with me who were behind me, and they too were looking to see if that stare was there. It was not there. He didn't make a mistake. It was fine. It was just a standard interview. No problems. Of course, his staff is ecstatic. I think that when I left, they opened champagne. I'm not kidding. And when I get back to the office and I'm writing my story, and I begin to hear a commotion in the edit booth where the interview was being screened. And I look up, and the entire bureau is crammed into this edit room. And then I start hearing laughter. And then people are coming out and patting me on the back. So I have to see what's going on. I go in, and there on the TV in the edit room is Dan Quayle. It's just a headshot. Deer caught in the headlights. Big as life. The camera had somehow gone behind whatever I was seeing, mask or whatever, had yanked this out of him. And of course it changed everything he said. Everything. Everything now is said with fear, with a lack of confidence, with an unsureness. It was a stunning transformation of this perfectly lackluster, to be honest with you, an interview without much news, and transformed it into an interview that people were probably going to snicker at. And I remember once calling Dan, well, actually, he was writing a book. He called me to ask me about to clarify something he wanted to write about. And so I told him the story. And I said, you know, your big enemy is the camera. But he didn't want to hear that because he wanted to blame the press for everything. So he didn't want not to know this story. But I always thought it was a telling story about not only you have the power picture, but you also have what the camera can do for people. And of course, the camera doesn't always penetrate the mask. In fact, with some politicians, the camera actually helps them keep the mask up. It certainly does with Bill Clinton, that's for sure. Now, I have, as I say, been am I going on too long? I didn't know, 5 more minutes. Oh, I have to raise a hand, I have to tell you this story. It has nothing to do with anything. It'll probably take me 5 minutes and then I'll stop talking. When I was hired at CBS in 1972, whenever I speak, I always tell this story. So if you've heard it, close your ears. When I was hired in 72, as I told you, it was because of affirmative action. And I got to cover the Watergate story. CBS sent me because I was the newest person. They sent me the newest person because everybody thought it was so unimportant and insignificant. And there I was covering the biggest, what became the biggest story in the world. And I stayed with it. I was lucky, and I stayed with it. And finally, the scandal ended up in the Senate, and Sam Ervin was the chairman of the hearings that were held, which I covered every day. And CBS in those days, this would never happen today in a million years, but we had specials every night, to analyze what had happened that day at the Senate hearings. And the bosses came to me to see if I felt I was ready to join the veteran males in analyzing the day's events. Because affirmative action was very popular in those days, and CBS wanted to show that it was an equal opportunity employer. So there I sat, and every night a moderator would ask a question, and one of the guys would answer it, and the other guy would disagree, and they would argue, and you would hear my disembodied voice saying, "But don't you think?" Or "I disagree," or "I agree," and then they'd drown me out. They'd just argue right over me. Till finally the bosses, our boss was Bill Small, he said, "This is rude. You men look awful. You don't let her talk, and the public hates it. We're getting calls. If you don't let her talk tonight, then we're just not going to do this anymore." So we all knew I was going to talk. And yet, the moderator's question, the opening question was, "Well, folks, what's the gossip about John Ehrlichman?" And I said, "Gossip? Let them answer this one, right? And I'll answer the next one." But they know I have to talk, so they wait. And wait, and wait, and they're actually turning in and they're poking me, but I decide I'm not going to gossip, that's it. So Daniel Shore jumps into the vacuum and says, "Well, if it's gossip you want, that's why we have a woman here." So I didn't handle this very well. I eventually obviously started talking, but made no sense and blathered, and things weren't parsing, and I think I did stop in the middle of a sentence. And finally the show ended, and I ran upstairs and I called home and I said, "Daddy, help me write a letter of resignation. I was so awful, and this was my big opportunity, and I blew it." And he said, "You were great." And I said, "Daddy, I was awful, and if you can't be honest with me, put Mother on the phone." And my father said, "Mother can't talk right now. She's too upset." I just have one more point to make, getting back to the game faces, because I have developed a theory. It's a partial theory about why the president's ratings went up so dramatically at the height of this scandal. And we all know some of the reasons that have been written about and discussed. The economy, obviously, the fact that the public got to dislike the enemies of the president more than they thought the scandal, more than they hated what was happening in the scandal. But let me add a third possibility, and that is Chelsea. Now, when the Clintons moved to Washington and Chelsea went to the Sidwell Friends School, the Clintons went to the press and said, "Please leave her alone and let her grow up as a normal kid, and don't go to the school, leave her alone." And in one of the great hours of the press, they complied. As far as I know, not even one photographer ever followed that kid to school, and she was allowed to grow up in peace. Now, all of a sudden, the scandal's erupting, and we're seeing pictures of Chelsea. This means the White House provided this opportunity to the press. We're seeing pictures of the president lovingly gazing at his daughter. We're seeing troika shots of Bill Hill and Chelsea, the great family picture. And of course, these are these emotional emanations that you're getting over the tube. Right before Christmas, right around the time of the impeachment vote, who remembers Chelsea and the president coming out of church together? I don't know about you, it was such an emotional moment. I remember it vividly. They came, walked out. Mrs. Clinton didn't go to church that day. And of course, everybody's wondering whether Chelsea's angry at her father, and she gave him an adoring look. And it was such an emotional picture as they walked down the steps of that big church. And of course, let's not forget that the Christmas before that one, the president got Buddy. Now, what picture says, "What a great guy," more than a man and his drooling dog? I mean, this is, Now, I was telling this story to a group when I was out selling my book, and an art historian came up to me afterward, and she said to me, in art, do you know what represents infidelity? And I said, no. And she said, the cat. And then she said to me, is it any wonder that they put socks in the closet and out comes Buddy? Because the dog is the representation of fidelity. And I just love that. By the way, the woman's name was Guggenheim. Anyway, I think that these pictures that the White House has somehow allowed us to have of Chelsea with her family have become embedded in our brains and form our gut sense of the Clintons as being family people. And this attenuates a little bit the sense of the womanizer and everything else. And I do believe it did contribute to sort of a softening of what people were thinking about the president as this scandal progressed. Now, I have about 10 or 12 pages to go here, but I'll just kind of stop in the middle and say I'd love to take your questions. And again, thank you so much for this wonderful, wonderful award. Thank you. Could you stay here and take a question?
If any of you have questions, this is a perfect opportunity to do it. I would ask you to come over to either one of the microphones, ask your question. Please do make it a question and not a speech, and let us know who you are if you're a student. Please, why don't you start?
Hi, Leslie, and congratulations for all your accomplishments. My name is Lisa Bensfeld, and I'm a graduate student here at Harvard University. Actually, I graduated several years ago. But the question I would like to ask you is, what advice do you have for aspiring women in the journalism field today? And also, if you have any inside information about women with disabilities in the media. I was wondering if you can comment on that, or if you have any advice or suggestions or comments.
Well, I think the story for women in our profession is excellent. Even at 60 Minutes, for instance, just about half the producers are women. Obviously, we're not running news organizations, but I'm just talking about reporters, producers, editors. I have a very strong sense that we have just about reached a level of equality. So my advice to any woman would be the same advice that I would give any man. I wouldn't treat in the advice department the sexes any differently. And my advice is always to get a job at a very small news organization, and it doesn't matter what medium it is, because the smaller the news organization, the more you'll do. Journalism is a skill. It's like riding a bicycle. The more you do it, the better you are at it. And the only way to really get to do journalism is to go to work for a place where there are so few people there that they have to give the new kid jobs where you go out, gather information, and write your story. If you come in and you're an intern at CBS, you'll probably get coffee from me, and that's not going to teach you anything. So that's my best advice. And the second bit of advice is to work as hard as you possibly can. I've never really looked into the situation for the disabled in journalism, but I did a story on all the wonderful new technologies for people with different disabilities, the computer and all kinds of devices and machines. And you really get a feeling if you look into what is available for people who are blind or in a wheelchair or deaf today. You almost get the sense that there isn't any barrier they can't cross. And the piece we did on 60 Minutes about this was very, very positive. So I hope you're feeling positive. Thank you.
Good. Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Owen Robinson. I'm an undergraduate here, and I'm from Syracuse, New York. And last Friday, I came to Sam Donaldson's speech here.
Oh, was Sam here on Friday?
Yeah, it was a very good speech.
What did he say?
Yeah. And
you'll tell me later.
Yes. Actually, he was talking about George W. Bush late in his speech, and he was talking about the fact that at the moment, George W. Bush has a policy of not commenting on past marital infidelity or anything like that. And Sam Donaldson said, that may work now, but if he gets to the general election, if he gets serious about this campaign, he's not going to be able to pull that off. He's going to have to give some answers to these questions. Now, I was wondering, just in general, if you think that anyone who runs for a major campaign nowadays in today's political climate basically has to voluntarily waive the kind of right to a private life that the rest of us have. And kind of in that same vein, I was wondering what you think of the ethics of People magazine's decision to stick Chelsea Clinton on its cover.
Boy, two completely different questions. Well, first, let's talk about the first, whether politicians from here on out for eternity are going to have to be subjected to bedroom questions and whatever else you want to call it. You know, the only thing that's going to change that, because Sam's right, we're going to ask, because it's the nature of the reporting beast. The only thing that's going to change that is a president or a strong leader who, because of his force of personality or because of his piousness or whatever, just stops it. You know, Reagan came in. We had Jimmy Carter, who was wishy-washy or whatever you wanted to say about him, and Ronald Reagan came. Everybody said when Jimmy Carter was president that the power of the Oval Office had been diminished forever. And Ronald Reagan came in, and he was a very strong president and just completely changed the whole public's perception of what a president could and couldn't do. If we get a president where the questions are so obviously inappropriate, so completely inappropriate, the questions go away. I think we're going to have a series of candidates who somehow get up to try to inoculate themselves. And George W. Bush has, I think, started what they're all going to end up doing, which is saying publicly, I've never cheated on my wife, nor will I ever cheat on my wife. And you're going to finally have the public say, we've got to get someone in there where those questions, you know, we want a person where those questions won't be asked, because he's so pure. And, you know, the answer to that, of course, is a woman.
Now, supposing it is a woman, would you have any objection if those same rough questions were thrown at her?
I have no objection, but I think if you looked at the likely crop, you know, the reporters would stop. It's unlikely. It's unlikely.
But they would stop, why? Because they don't
'Cause
think
it's
there's
unlikely.
been any infidelity, or they
Right.
don't want to appear to be?
No, I don't think, I
impolite?
do not think that the women are going to be treated any more gently or any differently. I think the same questions would be asked if they are appropriate. Not appropriate because man, woman, but because of the person. You know, there are just candidates, men. You know, you wouldn't have asked Richard Nixon. You know, you wouldn't have done it. That's my point. And Jimmy Carter, you wouldn't have done it. And if you did it once, you would have put an end to it. And the crop of women, I think, the woman we're looking at, can you imagine badgering Liddy Dole about her sex life? It just isn't going to happen.
What about the other question? Sorry. The second question.
Chelsea. Well, you see, I think that if the Clintons are going to allow her picture to be taken, and that's all People magazine really did, was take one of these pictures and put it on the cover, and it was a very nice story. I was a little baffled by the White House reaction. I guess what they wanted to do is say, okay, this is done, but please don't do it again. I mean, I don't think anybody in this country wants to see Chelsea suffer anymore. So,
Thank you.
but I didn't think People magazine deserved what came at them from the White House.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Anish Rahman. I'm a sophomore at the college. Thanks for coming in. As a member of 60 Minutes, you are definitely part of a pillar in the news magazine industry, if not the foundation. And my question is whether you look at shows like Dateline NBC as competition or as a future of news magazine shows. And if it is a future, is it one that you think you could change or one that you'd like to be part of at all?
Well, first of all, I think I'd love to say that 60 Minutes maintains its level of high-quality journalism because, you know, we're 60 Minutes and we just have that strength of character. But we seem to be in a protected time zone, 7 o'clock Sunday night. I always feel for my friends and colleagues who are on in prime time, because the audience, it appears, has a much different appetite at 10 o'clock at night than they seem to at 7 o'clock on Sunday night. And we were talking at our table, at dinner tonight where the executive producer of Dateline, Neil Shapiro, said in a group that I was part of, an on-the-record interview at the New York Times, that they watch their ratings by the minute. They do minute-by-minute clockings of what the audience is doing. And so let's say there's a piece on Bosnia, and the audience drops down. Then he'll say, okay, no more Bosnia stories. And I'm making up these subjects, but let's say, okay, we did a story on liposuction, and the audience went up. So let's have 3 more stories this year on liposuction. We don't do that at all. We don't have to do that. We've never been able to tell by anything we've watched that people watch 60 Minutes because of the subject. They just watch it. And so we have that luxury. And because I don't know what would happen if our ratings dropped out. I have no idea what kind of pressure we would be under. We've never had it. So I feel very lucky, and I'm happy where I am. I don't know what I'd go through if I worked on a show where they said, okay, go do a story on liposuction. I know I wouldn't be happy, or it certainly wouldn't be nearly as happy as a journalist as I am now.
We've got time for 2 real fast questions and answers. Nick?
Nick?
Leslie, I'm Nick Daniloff, and I run the journalism program at Northeastern University. Our paths crossed, as I remember, first at the Bremer trial.
Wow.
Do you remember that?
The Bremer trial was my first story, my
That's
very
right.
first story. This is Arthur Bremer, who shot Governor Wallace.
That's right. There is a rumor that circulates around here that the reason you wore your glasses in those first broadcasts was because you had to look terribly serious with all those men around.
Okay, Nick, I'm glad you brought my book up. Because I come clean in here. This is, the book, when I started to write it, was going to just be about, it was going to be about the presidents that I had covered, starting with Nixon, because I covered Watergate, and then do the other ones where I'd covered the White House. And then I thought, well, I'll also do some television news. I'd kind of been through a curve with the networks where what everybody watched at 6:30, and then when cable came in, we had our audience drop off. How did that affect television news? And then I thought, well, gee, I also lived through this revolution for women. I might as well talk about women. And then I thought, and then my editor said, well, you have to talk about yourself. And Marvin and I were talking about how do you talk about yourself? And I decided, well, if I'm going to talk about myself, and I'm going to be tough on the presidents, which I think I am, then I have to be tough on me. So I confess that as a woman who came into the business, and this would be true of any woman who went into the workplace in the early 70s, that there was a terrific bind because our bosses wanted us to be pretty, but not sexy. They wanted us to be cute, but serious. They wanted us to look great, but not be distracting. And they wanted us to convey a sense of gravitas, a sense of authority. And the only authority in those days were men. I mean, there was no such thing as a woman of authority. These were the days, I know you'll laugh, but I'm not meaning to be humorous about this. In the early 70s, if anybody got on an airplane and the pilot said, this is your pilot, Jane Smith, half the plane would get off. And anybody who went to a doctor, and the doctor came out and said, hi, I'm Marilyn Brown, the patient would do a U-turn and walk out, a lot of patients. So there was no such thing as a woman in authority. So our bosses were telling us that we had to be both good-looking and tough and serious and strong. And yes, my glasses were one answer. And I then, in those years, interviewed John Dean through a mail slot, by the way, in his house, because he didn't want to talk to the press. And I got down on my hands and knees and lifted up the little slot in the front door. I said, please talk to me. It was the afternoon before he testified at the Senate hearings. And the big scoop he gave me was that he'd gotten his hair cut real short, and he was going to wear his glasses. And of course, he was trying to convey the same sense, that he was serious and that that he was a man of heft and people should believe him.
That's a terrific answer, and I will withdraw my hardball question.
No, come on, what's your hardball question?
All right, last question, sir.
You're going to let him have his hardball question? Yeah. Okay.
Thank you for being here tonight.
Thank
My
you.
name is Hugh Ernest, and to keep my question short, I wrote it down. So I'm predicating my question on the belief that everyone knows that the United Nations 1979 Convention on Women's Rights has not yet been ratified by the United States Senate. Do you know the treaty I'm talking about, the Stahl Treaty? It's the Convention for the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. CEDAW is the abbreviation for it. It has been around for 20 years. The United States Senate has not yet ratified it. President Carter signed it and sent it to the Senate, but it's not been ratified. So I guess my question might not be possible then. Do you
Try
think
me,
that,
try me.
okay, do you think the Senate will be gracious enough to ratify this convention before the year 2000 on women's rights, international women's rights? And if not, why do you think they will not ratify it?
Well, I confess to you, I don't know the specific issue, but while you were talking, I could only remember that the state legislatures in the United States did not ratify the Equal Rights Amendment when it came up. The Senate did pass it, but then the state legislatures, how many do we need? Who's the great Scott? Was it 2/3 of the states? 2/3? 3/4? 3/4. And the women didn't reach that. And I'm guessing that the makeup of the Senate today is probably looking back on the Equal Rights Amendment and saying to itself, no, we're not going to do it. But I say that without knowing the details and have not followed this issue. But it's a great question, and now I want to know the answer.
Please do.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Leslie, before we let you go, I have a question for you, which is not a hardball question at all. As a matter of fact, the preamble is, you're such a terrific reporter that when you walked up onto this platform here, onto the stage, you must have noticed that there was something that belonged to you. So I'm going to ask you right now what it is.
This belongs to me.
Yes. And what else?
Take this home with me. And what else? Okay.
And I'm going to give you about 30 seconds.
This is your book.
That's my book, my notes.
No, sorry,
Check it out.
I'm checking. Don't see anything. Unless you want to give me the mic, I don't know.
No, this is mine.
Give me a hint.
Well,
Oh my goodness, I love this.
congratulations.
Thank you. Oh, that's so fabulous.
You have a Harvard chair.
A Harvard chair. That's so wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And just in conclusion, let me say thank you to all of you for being here, to all of our gracious winners and those who are near winners. You're all winners. And a reminder that tomorrow morning we'll be having our follow-up seminar in the Malcolm Penthouse in this building on the 4th floor. And all of the finalists for the Investigative Prize and Leslie Stahl will be having a discussion about investigative reporting, journalism, effect on public policy. We invite all of you to be with us. It starts at 9:30 and runs until 11:30. Continental breakfast at 9. Thank you all very much for being with us.
Gorgeous. Oh, thank you. Sharon, excuse me. Where'd you see? Can you head back?